Good afternoon. It's Tuesday, the 16th of January 2018, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, of course, Mike Robinson. Debt, £1.5 billion worth, and Carillion.
Yeah.
I was going to say we're going to take some time to have a look at this particular event, because it takes us into so much of British politics, none of which we guarantee will ever appear on the BBC.
Indeed. Well, let's just come up to date with what's going on with Carillion itself. Well, we should say, first of all, we'll be talking about their auditors in the not too distant future in this programme. We should point out that their auditors said back in March that the directors can believe that they have a reasonable expectation that the company will be able to continue in operation and meet its liabilities as they fall due over the following 3 years. So that didn't work too well, did it? Of course, the thousands of staff who are working for Carillion, working on private sector contracts, are apparently going to have their wages stopped tomorrow. So they're not being guaranteed anything unless their jobs are rescued by other firms. And 30,000 small firms are owed money by Carillion, so the fallout from this is likely to be quite widespread. But we don't need to worry because according to the Bank of England, the banks are all right.
Oh, well, this is good then. So I like the can believe. That's a good way to do business, isn't it? We can believe that it will be okay. There's £1.5 billion in trouble, but we can believe 30,000 small companies lose money.
Yes, 30,000 small companies, but don't worry, because Sam Woods, the head of the Bank of England's Prudential Regulation Authority, says that he told the Treasury Select Committee this morning that the £2 billion exposure to Carillion that the banks see, they can just swallow that. It's not a problem.
Yeah.
Okay, well, so this is all good stuff. We should remember, of course, that it was Carillion which built the donut, the building that GCHQ inhabits in Cheltenham.
Cheltenham, yeah.
Well, I believe, because I haven't seen it actually confirmed anywhere other than on the BBC Radio 4 Today programme this morning, that there was actually a COBRA meeting held yesterday, Brian, because there must be a facilities management contract in place that Carillion was responsible for. So we're not clear whether perhaps GCHQ is going to have to stop operations.
So an emergency security meeting. Where was the due diligence on all of this, Mike? Where was the government checks as to what was actually going on in this country? Because this hasn't just affected 30,000 people who've been involved with contracts for Carillion. This now goes to the heart of the security of the nation. So where was that due diligence? Was it done? I believe it wasn't done, and a little bit later we'll have a look at probably why it wasn't done. So
the question is, who's likely to take over that facilities management contract? I wonder, would it be G4S?
G4S, Serco, possibly?
Yeah.
So two interesting companies to be fully integrated with the GCHQ security system.
Absolutely. Now the big question then is, how far will the fallout go? And the other question is, how many more Carillion type companies are there? Because of course these are known as zombie companies. The zombie companies, just to give you a definition, first of all, what that is, this is companies that face expenses, costs, interest payments, which are bigger than what they earn each year. So in other words, their debt is never repayable. So these are what are known as zombie companies. We should remember that just towards the end of last year, the Bank for International Settlements had said that in the UK, about 10% of UK companies were considered to be zombie companies. In Europe, that figure is slightly less, and in the United States, it's up around 17-18%. But other sources, other than the Bank for International Settlements, were warning that perhaps if interest rates were going to go up even slightly, that perhaps Britain could be looking at 25% of its companies being classed as zombie companies. The IMF, of course, had said that 20% of all US corporations could become zombie companies with any marked rise in interest rates. Now, Carillion not the only company to have be suffering these types of problems. The South African company Steinhoff is having major problems at the moment of a similar style. So it also a zombie type company. Washington Post here asking why South Africa's Steinhoff could be the next Enron. And they've got a Q&A there. Now, Steinhoff Group is a South African-based retail conglomerate, so it owns many other companies. For example, it owns Conforama in France, it owns Poundland, Harvey's, Benson's for Beds in the UK. It has companies in the United States as well, and its debts total around $25 billion. Well, Poundland, concerned about this, they have managed to secure £180 million of independent finance, which they're going to share with Harvey's and Benson's for Beds, and that's an attempt to keep them afloat, separate from the Steinhoff fallout. Now, as I say, $25 billion in that case. Carillion, not a conglomerate, but its security debt is around the $2 billion mark, so it's at about £1.5 billion. Of course, it operates internationally, and it has a large number of short-term project loans, and of course a lot of joint ventures with other companies. Now, the government said yesterday that where there was a public sector contract involved, where Carillion was in partnership with other companies, that those other companies would have to pick up the load. That in fact they were required to, as under the terms of the contract. So the question is, are these other companies in a financial position to pick up the load?
Are they going to be pulled down?
Are they going to be pulled down as a result? So the implications of this are huge. We're seeing a lot of zombie companies in a pretty poor position at the moment. We've got two in the process of collapse at the moment, but we don't need to worry because the banks are safe.
What a zombie company really means is that the company is owned by the banks. Because if you can never pay off that debt or the interest on that debt, who ultimately owns you?
Well, either the banks or else they're bondholders anyway. Now, in the case of Carillion, their bondholders and their shareholders are going to get nothing.
Yeah.
But that doesn't matter. At the end of the day, there are people's jobs on the end of this, and also people's pensions.
And we're being told here that 10% of UK companies are probably in this position.
Yes.
And 25% could be if the interest rates go up.
Correct.
So potentially 25% of the productive economy of UK, we'll say it's productive, we don't know what these companies do, is at risk.
Absolutely.
But none of this is being discussed in the mainstream media in these terms.
You would have thought that would have been considered an existential threat and to the British economy and
to the security of the country.
And the government perhaps might want to do something about that, but apparently not, because we're not doing anything about the financial system or the entire basis of our economy, which is all wrong-headed at the moment. Now, if we go back to the Bank of England here for a second, we've got Andy Haldane speaking last year, and he was saying, there is a U-shaped relationship between firms' productivity and debt, with both high productivity companies, these are known as gazelles, by the way, and low productivity companies, zombie companies, having high debt ratios. And he said higher interest rates hit both types of company, and so the net effect on productivity is an empirical question, is what he was saying. But there just doesn't seem to be any realism in what any of these people are saying. They're acknowledging and recognizing the fact that large numbers of companies are carrying unsustainable debt, but they're not actually dealing with that problem. They're going to wait and until it. I mean, there's some people talking about 1 million jobs at risk as a result of the fallout from zombie company collapse in the not too distant future. Yeah,
interesting comment in the UK column chat room, because somebody said a few moments ago, this is all planned, and I think that's an extremely interesting way to look at this. Of course, if we can go back to Danny Kruger, potential Tory party candidate, a couple of years ago, might have been slightly more, he said the Conservatives were planning a period of what they called creative destruction, creative chaos in public services. The MP Nick Bowles also reinforced that. He said that is true. That is what the Conservatives are planning to do. And everywhere we go at the moment, we're seeing utter chaos breaking out. It's in the military, it's in the NHS, and now we've got this amazing collapse right at the core of very big business.
It's interesting you bring that up, Brian, because this term, creative destruction, it is an economic term. It has come out of, I can't remember the name of the Austrian US economist. I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but he derived this theory of creative destruction from Karl Marx. So this is a Marxist doctrine. Now, both Andy Haldane mentioned it in that speech I was talking about a minute ago, and you're talking about a conservative MP, or who was it?
Two conservative
MPs using this term. This is not a conservative term. It's a Marxist derived.
So on that basis, let's bring in this image, which I just find extraordinary. It's come from the pages of Common Purpose. It's got the girls, led by Julia Middleton with a candle. Not quite sure what's going on here. They're looking very pleased with themselves. Do they go from here to a lower level to discuss things? Is it part of a ceremony for the dark arts? I don't know. But we're back into your favourite subject to CSC, future leaders here. And why have we got on to Common Purpose? Because we need to get into connections with Carillion. So let's have a look at how this works. You can check this, of course, for yourself, because if you go to Common Purpose's own web page, you can have a look at the information here. But this is CSC leaders. Remember, bringing together some of the world's most exceptional leaders. We draw on expertise, experience and talent of diverse individuals from our advisory group and selection group, as well as the Common Purpose staff team. And down here on the left, what does the selection group do? They identify the right participants. They identify sector geographic headhunters. They are ensuring quality. They're ensuring the process is fair and transparent. That's an interesting conundrum. Assisting with identified gaps in the overall group composition. So who does all these wonderful things? Well, we've got to highlight this one here, which is Keith Cochrane, Interim Chief Executive of the Carillion Group. So here he is. So this wonderful organisation, which has collapsed right at the heart of selecting future global leaders under the Common Purpose banner. This is just amazing. Remember that in the past, Common Purpose has put forward the Lehman Brothers Bank as a role model for school children. That also collapsed with immense debts. But these are the people that Common Purpose is working with to help change not just UK, but to transform the world. So we might as well bring in KPMG, the auditors for Carillion. And this became very interesting indeed. We just happened to have a look at one lady here, Crew Desai. She's a partner at KPMG in the UK, leading the government and infrastructure practice. So now we see that the auditors are actually connected into the government as well. We can just highlight some of this so you can read it for yourself. She rejoined KPMG in July 2010, having from a FTSE 250 business service provider. But she originally came from Westminster City Council, it appears from this. But she's now advising clients on transformation and performance improvement programs in the UK, Sub-Saharan Africa and mainland Europe. But this is the company, Mike, that says they can believe everything was all okay in Carillion.
Absolutely.
So this gets a bit puzzling. Well, let's follow on through, because they're also helping the government reimagine itself. Now, this is not my imagination because it's here on KPMG's website. They are working with the heart of British government to help the government reimagine everything it does. So you think at the moment we have a fully democratic government. No, in the background, we've got this huge organisation which has failed totally, it would appear, to predict what was happening in Carillion. It's this very same company that's helping government, British government, reimagine itself. It's quite impressive, isn't it?
Good
Once
stuff.
you're on the trail and you know where to go. Well, this is part of an embedded video on their page. And here they're actually talking about the the Reimagining Challenge. The video is for the 2016 one. But essentially what they're doing is working alongside key government civil servants. The Cabinet Office is very close to this. And they are saying, choose a subject where you think there should be change in government, and we're going to help you to talk about that. And then whoever wins our little challenge, the government's promised that they're going to give that civil service team support to put their plan into action.
Their change plan. Their
change plan, their transformation plan. So KPMG working right at the heart of government. So do you think if they began to get a sniff that Carillion was going to go down, they're in a problematic position because they're in bed with the government? Well, this is the lady in that video, Polly Stewart-Lacey. She's a very interesting individual, head of communications in the Cabinet Office. And let's remember, of course, that it was Common Purpose fully embedded in the Cabinet Office. So this change agenda, it's very easy to track down. This lady's been in the press before. This was part of a Guardian article. Public sector executives call for restrictions on freedom of information. Quite a tough article from the Guardian when they're saying we should be making things more transparent, but the government is trying to close down with freedom of information. And they pointed out that the minutes from the Commission show that this lady, Polly Stewart-Lacey, the head of communications at the Cabinet Office, which appointed the Commission, is actually working alongside its press team. So this is a pretty mucky little area as well, particularly as we know, of course, Common Purpose worked inside the Cabinet Office, choosing its leaders, and then helped to set up the Leveson inquiry via the Media Standards Trust. So now we're getting a really big mix between KPMG, Common Purpose, Carillion, and the Cabinet Office. But this man also stars in the video as well. This is John Manzoni, Chief Executive of the Civil Service and Cabinet Office Permanent Secretary. So we're into some pretty high level stuff here. KPMG just seems to have an open back door to dealing with the government, Mike.
Yeah.
And if you're not sure what that chief executive does for the civil service, here it is. To improve delivery and execution skills, digital, commercial, well, that would include Carillion. Project leadership, that would include Carillion. Embed cross-government functions and strategies for more effective execution, Carillion. Create agendas for sustainable improvements in public service productivity, and improving accountability and performance management, building leadership capacity. So this is all of the common purpose language of this man, fully in bed with KPMG. Not so good with this Guardian article because it was pointing out back in July 2016 that the National Audit Office was damning the work of John Manzoni and saying that this man was actually failing to do what was needed. So if we sum this up in just one diagram here, this is how it looks. We've got Carillion here failing at the heart of government, causing security problems through GCHQ. We've got the auditors, KPMG, helping the government reimagine itself via the Cabinet Office. And we've also got a link through to the Global Resilience Summit, which I think you've come across before, Mike. Just incredible. That's a mixture of government, KPMG and Common Purpose, and then a link back into that CSC leaders. This is not democratic government in any form that we've known previously, even accepting there's been weaknesses and problems. This is a sham of democracy, and what we've got is, it's big society, isn't it, really? We've got charities in bed at the heart of government with big business, simply making changes with no debate in Westminster at all.
Now, we are hearing constantly from Theresa May at the moment about the need for resilience and building resilience. This is one of her key buzzwords at the moment. And as you put at the bottom of your diagram here, the Global Resilience Summit. Now, we've been warning about this for quite some time, and I want to highlight this article. This goes with the city-states agenda that we've also been warning about for quite some time. So this article, published by Martin Edwards on the UK Column website in June 2016, the Resilient Cities Programme, Another Threat to Individual Liberties. And the first thing that he's highlighting is who's really driving the Resilient Cities Programme and this concept of resilience. And it comes back to a bunch of the usual suspects, including the Rockefeller Foundation and the United Nations. And if you can see, if you're watching this on video, you'll see the group of faces on there. There are plenty that are recognized.
George Soros, Bill Gates.
Right, for example. Now, one of the things that we mentioned in this article was the MOIC participants recognized in the Global Resilience Summit. We'll explain what MOIC is in a second. But basically, in October 2015, London First teamed up with Common Purpose to launch a cyber resilience challenge on the Common Purpose Massive Online Innovation Community. This is the MOIC, the Massive Online Innovation Community, where participants are encouraged to submit ideas that will influence the way we, and the question that Martin Edwards asked is, who is we? That will influence the way we prevent, react, recover, and adapt to cyber dangers in collaboration with stakeholders. The Common Purpose Massive Online Innovation Community says it brings together over 45,000 Common Purpose alumni from around the world in an online community to consult and collaborate with fellow leaders. It goes on to say, amongst the delegates that we discovered was the head of Global Client Relations Common Purpose, the Chief Executive for Student Experiences Common Purpose Global, the Deputy Assistant Secretary General for Emergency Security Challenges NATO, the head of the Office of Director Europol, 4 representatives from Deutsche Bank, 8 representatives from KPMG, Mike Gapes MP for Ilford South, who's the Vice Chair of the British Group for Interparliamentary Union at the time, and Lord Haney of Chiswick, who's Chair of the United Nations All-Party Parliamentary Group. Christina Fragola attended on behalf of the 100 Resilient Cities organisation. She's the Regional Director for Europe and the Middle East, and she was previously European Regional Director of the C40 Cities Climate Leadership Group. We were talking a little about that yesterday with Mark Anderson. And Eileen Herring-Woods, Chief Executive Director of the Global Parliament of Mayors project, and also Sir David Venice, who is Chairman of the London First Security and Resilience Network Advisory Board, an advisory board, by the way, Brian, which also contains Cressida Dick, who's currently the Met Commissioner,
Head of the Met.
And obviously a Common Purpose graduate herself. So this is a pretty significant network.
Well, it's astonishing, Mike. We've got Common Purpose there at the centre of it. Now, let's remember that Deutsche Bank, we've got to say almost certainly, because Common Purpose, Julia Middleton in particular, would never declare who the original funding partners were of Common Purpose. She said, we were given £500,000 to start our charity, £500,000, as you do. And we know that later the connections with Deutsche Bank extremely strong. So we've got a charity based in Britain, which very quickly infiltrated everywhere. It was into government, civil service, the military, colleges, fire service, police, local authorities. It was everywhere. Who was funding it? Foreign banks. Deutsche Bank being one of the key ones, and yet this organisation has also itself been into GCHQ. Common Purpose was training GCHQ desk officers. We've already proved that by revealing the names and the positions of those individuals. What is this charity doing at the heart of government? And of course, it is at the heart of government through the Cabinet Office.
And so what we're showing here is this rat's nest of vested interests and so on. And the question has to be asked, if KPMG was spending a bit more time on its auditing process it may have identified the problems with Carillion instead of pursuing its globalist agenda here.
Yeah, I think they knew about the problems, Mike. I agree with the gentleman who said this is a planned collapse. I think this is part of the orchestrated destruction of UK. The Tories said they were going to do it. They are doing it. Just my personal opinion, but I don't think this is accidental. Well, we better bring in one of Common Purpose's users, of course, the BBC. We're not sure how much the BBC has actually spent on Common Purpose. We know it's a minimum of £145,000. That's the only figure they would declare a few years ago. But we are not going to see any of this reported on the BBC. And I just wanted to come back to the statistic which we talked about on Friday, which was 1 in 6, which I think works out roughly 1 in 6 believe the BBC. So roughly 83% of Britons don't trust the BBC. Why don't they trust the BBC? Because the BBC will not tell the truth. Why won't it tell the truth? Because it is a common purpose organisation. So that was the statistic. We said this is the source. It was funny, little article in the Mail on the 6th of January. We put that article up so people could check it. But I want to say thank you to Credit Plus. Now, I know they are a user of the banks and credit, but this was the company that was kind enough to come back to UK Column and say, yes, we did commission this survey by onepoll.com, in which it was revealed that just 1 in 6 trusted the BBC, and they were very happy to let us use this data. So I just wanted to give this company a thank you. They were kind enough to get in touch with us. They were kind enough to say, yes, we can confirm that this data analysis was correct. Well, let's just bring in this one, another Daily Mail article. It's about policemen who've been suspended over pretty unpleasant texts about raping crime victims. They were also taking video or showing video showing suspects in custody that they'd secretly filmed. Well, the Met Police is going to investigate this, but of course we just want to remind people that what the Met Police does not want to investigate, or do not want to investigate, is all of the evidence that very brave policeman John Wedger brought to light around the abuse and indeed the murder of young children in London, which murders and abuse which were covered up by Met Police, politicians, local authorities, members of parliament and charities. We don't want any investigation into that, but these men have been sharing some pretty unpleasant texts and some video, and there's going to be a full investigation. And before I hand back to Mike, just wanted to say it's been fascinating to see over the weekend the furore over Mr. Bolton, Henry Bolton, UKIP leader. I see, Mike, that he's decided to solve the problem of his 25-year-old lover by dumping her. So she says the wrong thing, love is out the window, she's dumped so that he can attempt to cling on to his job as UKIP leader. Personal opinion from me, I'm going to say this man has been duplicitous in his previous personal relationships, his marriage. Along comes a young floozy and she's going to be dumped. My prediction is he will do exactly the same with UKIP supporters because his allegiance isn't fully with UK, it's with his love life.
Okay. Right, Financial Times here saying that the UK cabinet is divided over EU trade talks stance. Now, what's this about? Well, basically, the cabinet contains some people who are allegedly Eurosceptic and other people that are allegedly for Remain. And so they can't decide what's the best way to approach trade talks. Now, this is the thing that they've been banging on about for 18 months now as being the most important aspect of the Brexit negotiations. And here we are, we still don't have any clear idea of what policy they're going to pursue with regard to these trade negotiations. This, of course, is complete and utter nonsense because in David Cameron's Best of Both Worlds white paper, they spelled out exactly what the Tory party policy on trade was with regard to the European Union. And so anything else that's going on here is sort of obfuscation and delay and appearances of chaos in the background.
So chaos is good, of course, for slowing everything down.
Absolutely. Well, of course, today, Brexit back on the agenda, not only because of this issue, but also because they are discussing the EU withdrawal bill further. And also news that leaked papers suggesting that Brussels is going to harden, or that they're saying that it's going to harden its negotiating stance, that they want a veto over future trade deals signed by the UK. So in other words, if the UK signs a trade deal with a country that the EU has a trade deal with, the EU is suggesting that they want the power to veto some aspects of those trade deals that Britain might do with other countries.
Yeah, it's Brexit without the exit, I think we're looking at, Mike.
I think that's absolutely it. Now, the Institute for Fiscal Studies has produced a report today entitled Problem Debt and Low Income Households. And they're really concerned about unsecured household debt in Great Britain, but particularly with people that have lower incomes. They're saying in recent years the debt holdings of households in Great Britain have been a subject of attention and concern amongst policymakers and the general public. In particular, there have been heightened awareness of unsecured household debt or consumer credit, such as credit card debt, hire purchase agreements, and unsecured loans. So they say that around half of households in Great Britain in 2012 to 14 had some unsecured consumer debt, with 10% of households holding over £10,000 of such debt. Almost half of this kind of debt is from formal loans, with credit and store card debt and hire purchase debt the next most significant categories. They say that those with lower incomes are less likely to hold any unsecured debt, but much more likely to be in net debt, with unsecured debt of greater value than their financial assets. Are these then going to be described as zombie households? I'm not entirely sure. 35% of those in the lowest income decile have debts of greater value than their financial assets, and this compares with 10% in the highest income decile. So what we're saying here, Brian, is that in the corporate world and in the consumer world, we have unsustainable levels of debt. We have been talking about this in the UK column for since 2008, really, and the situation has only got worse. Nobody is addressing it, so in this sense, I think I agree with you completely that this has to be an organised collapse that we're coming onto, because after what happened in 2007, 2008, and all the denials that anybody saw it coming, I can't imagine that there's anybody really in a position to be able to pretending to deny that they saw the next one coming, because it's been coming for quite a few years.
Has, Mike, and I'll just drop in, it's very interesting that Jeremy Corbyn, of course, and a few others signed up to the early day motion for the Bradbury Pound, which could have started to, and still can, unravel this by starting to take power away from the banks, creating money from nothing. But of course, the Labour leader has decided to step well away for that now, doesn't want to communicate, doesn't want to answer communication. So it still appears that the Bradbury Pound is very frightening, and a suggestion that effectively national finances should be reset. I'm using that term. I know it's used by the other side as well, but in this case of taking away the power of the banks producing money from nothing. And if you want to have a look at more about this, have a look on the UK column website and search for Bradbury Pound. There are articles plus the excellent video that Mike made.
Now, yesterday we mentioned the text message that was sent to every inhabitant in Hawaii over the weekend, which said, "Ballistic missile threat inbound to Hawaii, seek immediate shelter. This is not a drill." I was speaking to some people last night with relatives in Hawaii who really said to me, you cannot underestimate the effect that this had on people in Hawaii. They've had a constant barrage of stuff in the media about the risk from North Korea, and this had people absolutely panicking. Now, just by coincidence, the previous day, the day before that text message was sent, the Chamber of Commerce in Honolulu was holding the Hawaii Military Affairs Council meeting. Quite a number of military types there. It included people from U.S. Pacific Command, including Admiral Harry Harris, Major General Russ Mack, Air Force Lieutenant General Dan Leaf, a whole bunch of people, and they were absolutely, a lot of neocon types. They were absolutely saber rattling with regard to North Korea. And then the following day, Brian, this text message gets sent, but it was just an accident.
Difficult to say what it was, but I'm just fascinating. The Military Affairs Council was comprised of business leaders, retired US flag and general officers. It's interesting to see that combination of people.
Yes.
I'd like to know what business leaders were involved with this. Are we at the Soros level, for example? I'm just going to be a bit provocative. But yeah, pretty amazing event, and I can imagine people utterly terrified.
Now, Sputnik reporting today that yesterday the Russians had been flying some T-160 bombers over the Barents, the Norwegian and North Seas. Well, that's interesting as far as it goes. They said 2 Russian Tu-160 Blackjack strategic bombers have carried out a planned patrol flight over neutral waters, the Barents, the Norwegian and the North Seas. The Russian Defense Ministry said the flight lasted for more than 13 hours. During the flight, the Tu-160s performed aerial refueling. So that's interesting enough. But I was more interested in the government response to this, because they issued a press release saying that RAF Quick Reaction Alert Typhoon aircraft scrambled from RAF Lossiemouth to monitor 2 Russian planes approaching UK airspace. The Russian Blackjack Tupolev Tu-160 long-range bombers were not talking to air traffic control, making them a hazard to all other aviation, they say. The RAF worked closely with NATO partners to monitor the jets. I wasn't sure whether that was because the RAF didn't have any monitoring capability of their own, so they had to ask somebody else to monitor.
We've got to say they haven't got the aircraft. The RAF have not got the operational aircraft to cope with very much. They can probably cope with this, that's about all. And we've got the military being cut to the bone while the government says that Russia is a growing threat.
Absolutely, and in fact, Gavin Williamson said exactly that. He said the threats this country faces are intensifying, and we will not hesitate in defending our skies. And my question is, Gavin, what with your spider?
What with, as he cuts more assets, and of course we know that there's proposals now that the British Army is brought down to levels of maybe 50,000. That happens to be the figure that UK Column first mentioned back in 2007, I think it was. So the government says Russia is a growing threat, and the same Conservative government then cuts UK military to the bone, inducing chaos in the military. This is planned, Mike. There can only be one reason for it.
Right. I want to highlight this article in Consortium News. I suggest people go and read it. It is very interesting. It's written by Ray McGovern, the former CIA analyst, and he was a Soviet analyst for the CIA. And he's basically giving a hard time to the Trump hatred that's going on in the United States at the moment. And he's accusing people of manipulating US politics, effectively carrying out a soft coup. He says that if you look at the text messages that have been released between former FBI counterintelligence chief Peter Strzok, if that's how you pronounce his name, and his girlfriend, FBI lawyer Lisa Page, that this has given us documentary proof that, quotes, key elements of the US intelligence community were trying to short-circuit the US democratic process in the last days of the Obama administration. And he said that this is FBI's 18-month campaign to sabotage candidate and now President Donald Trump by using the Obama administration's Russiagate intelligence assessment, electronic surveillance of dubious legality, and a salacious dossier that could never pass a smell test, while at the same time using equally dubious techniques to immunize Hillary Clinton and her closest advisors from crimes that include lying to the FBI and endangering secrets. As I say, I'd suggest people have a read of that. It is typical Ray McGovern dark humor, and well worth reading. And really, we're starting to see the continuing fallout from this. This is what's driving the whole Trump is mental campaign at the moment, because Russiagate has just fallen flat.
Yep.
And we'll end with Syria, because, of course, one of the problems with Trump's administration is that is the duplicity of it. There seem to be people doing things that perhaps policies that Trump wouldn't be pursuing himself. And if we look in Syria, TASS here reporting or saying that Russia's top diplomat says US not interested in keeping Syria's territorial integrity, and in fact saying that this is not a fight against Daesh and terrorism, but support of Daesh and terrorism, because what they seem to be doing here is creating it's being described by the Russians as a terrorist army in the guise of border security forces in northern Syria. Sorry, that's according to Turkey's Deputy Prime Minister. The Russian foreign minister, the Syrian foreign minister slammed Washington's intention to form a 30,000 strong force inside the country with the goal, apparently, of maintaining security of the borders. But in fact, what seems to be happening is that the United States is taking all their tame terrorists, all the so-called moderate armed rebel groups, and creating a new army with it.
Because they don't want to let the policy die. Regime change was the objective.
Absolutely. And
it still remains the objective. It's been thwarted by the Russians at the moment, but obviously the US, UK and EU are going to do everything they can to try and push that policy through in the future. So creating an army on the border seems to be a good start to that, and then fomenting trouble inside the country. Once again, one would hope that the Syrian government is a lot wiser to UK and US driven subversion.
I think that seems to be the case.
Yeah. Okay, well, what do we say about that news? It's becoming increasingly obvious that at the moment we do not have a proper system of government in UK. There is no proper debate in Westminster. We're seeing policy formed through these closed door committee meetings between the Cabinet Office and a range of private companies and charities such as Common Purpose. If we want to stop what's happening, it's got to be exposure. And on that note, it's also becoming apparent that the close down on social media is having an effect. There is no doubt many people are reporting about this. Can we trust Facebook? Can we trust Twitter anymore to actually put out the real number of retweets? We don't think so. So if you're a viewer or a listener for UK Column and you want to do something simple to help the work that we do, we would say please do everything you can to spread UK Column news, to share it with your friends, colleagues, acquaintances, and help flood the internet with perhaps some real news for a change. Thanks very much for joining us. We'll be back at the same time tomorrow. Bye-bye.